welcome you to Then, Now, Next, Crafters, Growers, and Revolutionary Ideals. I am Tim Henderson. I'm the Executive Director of Humanities, Tennessee. And I really want to take a second to thank, deep thanks for all of you for joining us today. A special thanks to our host, East Tennessee History Center, and to our sponsors for this event and other events that we'll be doing throughout the rest of the run-up to the 250th, the Federation of State Humanities Councils, and the Tennessee Arts Commission. Really special note of gratitude to our panelists who are joining us today, Dr. Torrin Gadsden, Brooks Lamb, sorry, I just lost the rest of my notes, here we are, and to Wookie Massaquoi-Wicks, and also to Allie Simpson. Thank you all for joining us today. And our moderator, Caroline Carrico. The expertise and the unique perspectives that you're going to see from practitioners and historians and storytellers give gatherings like this a really special power. Thank you all for being here today. We're finding ourselves in the midst of commemorating America's 250th anniversary. Humanities Tennessee is taking this as a unique opportunity to look both backward and forward at the same time to commemorate that 250th. We saw this as a real true intersection with the aims of our newest initiative, the Shared Futures Lab. The lab aims to ensure that Tennesseans have the tools and the experience to contribute to consensus building, to help our public all over the state become more informed, more imaginative, more intentional about confronting both the challenges and accepting the unique opportunities of shaping our own future with intention. So you can learn more about the lab and about all of Humanities Tennessee's work on our website. That's at humanitiestennessee.org. And thinking about the 250th of the founding, just say briefly that our democracy was founded in many ways by crafters and growers who envisioned their work as being vital to our new independence, making their contribution inextricable from revolutionary ideals like freedom and mutuality, equality, collective well-being. So today we're here to discuss how those activities have evolved, and crucially, how crafters and growers stand to shape the next chapter of American democracy over the next 50 years. So thank you all for being here with us today to help imagine this and talk about our future together. So with that, I want to welcome our moderator today, Caroline Carrico. Thank you, Caroline.
Thank you all for being here today. So we're going to start with two presentations by our two scholars, and then we'll start with that. Okay. And then we'll have our panel discussion. So our first presentation is Dr. Torrin Gadsden, the Associate Professor of History and the Associate Director of the Center for Historic Preservation at Middle Tennessee State University. And he's going to be speaking on the continuums of craft, 250 years of African American making. Please join me in welcoming him.
So, good afternoon. And I'm here just to share some brief comments with you about my presentation and how all of this rolls into not just what's happening at the national stage with the 250th anniversary, but also how crafters play a role in that revolutionary scheme, and specifically from the perspective of the African American experience. And so the title of the work, The Continuums of Craft, 250 Years of African American Making. And so I start with this screen because I'm also the co-director of the Black Craftspeople Digital Archive. And this is the flagship organization that collects, studies, preserves, documents, and interprets the lives and experiences of Black craftspeople on the landscape throughout America. And so currently we have roughly 2,500 individuals, both named and unnamed, who are stored in the database from two states, South Carolina and Tennessee. And that's what's visible to the public, but we are moving over, transitioning to a new website, Omeka S from Omeka. And when that takes place in full in June, we'll be adding hopefully some 10,000 more names from about 16 more states, including in the Caribbean. But it was my work with the Black Craftspeople Digital Archive that collided with one of my co-curators, I'll talk about in a second, which brought about Fighting for Freedom in this exhibition. And so what we see on screen is one of the images that's actually captured in Fighting for Freedom. But it has a unique place here in the eastern pocket of Tennessee, as this was made by famed furniture maker Louis Buckner. And this piece is actually belongs to the Tennessee State Museum, and they graciously loaned it for the portion of the show. But what's important about this image, beyond its kind of impressive physique, is that if you were to look closely, is why I pulled out kind of those almost like acorn or nut finials and flowers and etched impediments, is that Buckner was a master of conveying what he saw in the landscape and literally putting that into his work. And thus creating some of the most ornate features in construction that we know of from craftspeople. But Buckner made this bed for a white family in East Tennessee. And so it speaks to how Buckner was also seen and wanted for his creation. So, Fighting for Freedom, the exhibition, comes about by the DAR, the Daughters of the American Revolution, and the point and purpose is to commemorate the African American experience as it related to craft within the revolution. And so working with my co-curators, first the founder and co-director of the Black Craftspeople Digital Archive, Dr. Tiffany Moman, who's at Sewanee, University of the South, and William Strollo, who then was at the Daughters of the American Revolution, is now a curator at the Museum of Early Southern Decorative Arts in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. We set out on an ambitious path to take objects, in total 47, from collections around the country and actually around the world, and put them together to show the myriad of ways in which African Americans sought freedom, but freedom through creation. When we think about creation, right, and making, it's not a monolith. And in many cases, there are many inroads and goals to why and how objects are made and for what purpose and what offspring it comes from. And so we have in the top left a contemporary piece of art by master furniture maker Robel Awaka, who is emulating the style of another Tennessean, Richard Dick Pointer out of Williamson County, Tennessee, noted for his famous ladderback chairs that held their frame over hundreds of years. And in the center we have a teapot by Alexandra Petrie, or from the shop of Alexandra Petrie in Charleston, South Carolina, but is believed to also have the hand of his enslaved worker Abraham. To that on the right, we have a fan by Tobias Scott, who made beautiful fans in the ephemeral style from peacock and other bird feathers. Below that, we have actually wig curlers from that the enslaved used at George Washington's childhood home, Ferry Farm, to rebuff and redo and remake wigs, recreating styles. In the center, there is a quilt made by the Morton sisters of Kentucky, who were both enslaved, and this was graciously loaned to us by the Folk Art Museum in New York. And lastly, Dennis Durham, who was a known merchant and businessman in Kentucky. So the actual exhibition was set up in 5 themes, starting with mastery and then contradiction, pride, identity, sojourn, and then technically a 6th, which would be the closing in moments. And in this, we looked and sought to encompass all of the different thematic approaches that one might encompass in the idea of making. And so as you're looking here in mastery, we're focusing on not just the construction, but also how one goes about that process. And so the silver pot by Petrie is featured in this section, along with other cabinet makers and furniture makers, but also individuals who use tools. And the goal, again, of the exhibition was to have people toil with the question of what is freedom and how are individuals identifying freedom through the process of making. And with that process of making, there is a such freedom of creation, but to what end and why? And so, as you see here on the left, a gentleman who has visited the exhibition is focusing in on the second section, and one I'll spend just a few minutes talking about in contradiction. So in the contradiction section of the exhibition, it focuses on objects connected to makers who have a direct connection to what we call, quote unquote, the framers of American democracy. So we have pieces from John Hemmings, who is enslaved by Thomas Jefferson, which both pieces are from Monticello and are confirmed of John Hemmings' hand, made for the Poplar Forest Plantation. We also have pieces from George Washington's Ferry Farm and Mount Vernon, as well as pieces from Wilton with another connection. And there's also the Hoban payroll, which is one of the documents used to show register for who was working and paid to build the White House and the Capitol. And one of the things that's underscored here is this idea that for African Americans, they played and participated in not only the literal building of America, but they've also participated in the building of democracy and the building of these ideas of freedom, contributing to cornerstones, both the White House and the Capitol, that are idyllic in our governmental systems, but also producing objects for individuals within the myriad of framing. And we think about how and why that happens. And so one of the goals of the exhibition is to pose, in certain cases, more questions than we receive answers. And it's to stimulate the public to think about this idea of creation and why someone creates, right? And you'll hear me kind of oversell that again and again because it's important to move outside of this, some would say, kind of narrow focus of creation for utilitarian use. And while that is a purpose, there's oftentimes more valuable reasons that kind of undergird the purpose for creation. Here is just another example of the wig and the wig curlers, and also this piece of furniture here and the dumbwaiter, which is behind the stand. Those are both made by John Hemmings at Monticello. So identity, and I know my time is brief, so identity is my favorite section of the exhibition. I spent a lot of time in here, so I'm going to just sit here for a minute and talk about how identity formulates within creation. And so all the objects in this section show or reverberate a prism of identity as it relates to making. And so we mentioned Dennis Durham, or I showed you him earlier. The reason why Durham is in this section in identity is because he was a merchant, formerly enslaved, and goes from being enslaved into becoming a wealthy businessman in Kentucky. So much so that he has his portrait and his wife, who is not featured, but if the pair were perfect, it would be together as they are. Dia DeMora was her name. He has his portrait commissioned, and he has his work commissioned by a very famous or a becoming famous artist, Patrick Henry Davenport, who's an itinerant painter that's coming down, we believe, from Ohio. And as of late, Davenport's works have become famed in places like Mesda that I mentioned earlier, collecting his works. But to known record, Durham is the only person of African American descent that Davenport actually paints, speaking to his prominence and his power. And so the reason why this object is in here hanging is because he's created a pathway and a making towards roots of freedom. In the case, there is an enslaved badge, and there's a picture, a daguerreotype of a young male white sitter. And the enslaved badge talks about this idea of creating freedom with respect to movement and autonomy within a system of oppression. But the daguerreotype is perhaps my favorite object within the entire show, and it was captured by famed photographer Augustus Washington. And so, for all of you, just to humor me, show of hands, how many of you know who Augustus Washington is? Okay, so this gets the hands up. How many of you have never heard of Augustus Washington? This is perfect. Because I guarantee you, all of the hands that went up are now gonna know this. So put your hands up again if you've never heard of Augustus Washington. Okay. Now keep them up for just a second. Put your hand down if you've never heard of John Brown. John Brown, the famous John Brown. If you've never heard of him, put your hand down. Right, everybody's hand is still up. So Augustus Washington was born in New Jersey, and he was born to a half family, one enslaved and one free originally, and so by ergo, he was free because his mother was free. And he's reared in New Jersey, and he goes through early education until he stops at a point because of the laws shifting on education in New Jersey. He ends up enrolling in Dartmouth College, the only African American to do so in the 1840s, in the 1840s in which he enrolled. But nothing's new under the sun. He had money troubles, and he ended up having to drop out. He takes up the art of photography during his time, and he hones that craft. He moves around in different circuits. And eventually he lands taking photos in the abolitionist circle and working with schools. And we believe that it's through there that he meets John Brown. And so pressed, which you can't see, I should have a better image, but pressed onto the red silk pillow of the case is Augustus Washington's name and also his studio, which is in Connecticut. And it's in that studio that Augustus Washington has John Brown sit, and he takes one of the most iconic photos of all time is the 4-print still of John Brown, which has been on view at the National Portrait Gallery almost forever. And so the reality is, when we think about identity here, we have this African-American man who literally crystallizes not only the viewpoint, but the hallmark of what we see as identity, right? And he took the picture. And when you go to the museum, you see that he is credited as taking the picture, but you don't hear the other story, which buttressed together makes an even more impactful reality to how craft has a residual haunt that affects in positive ways. The end of the show talks about moments, and there again is Robel's chair, and we end it in a way that highlights all of the different makers, known and unknown, that were featured in the show, and some others, to show just kind of that long arc of how creation and what creation does. The reason this section is entitled Moments is because we understood in 2025 that there would be a moment on the heels of the anniversary of America, and in actuality it started in 2025 and will go through next year, but this is the year that we are really using to celebrate it nationwide. And so we wanted to really have people stand still in that moment of what is and how is creation. And so ultimately what Fighting for Freedom is a testament to the legacy of how individuals use their various skills, whether it be silversmithing, tinsmithing, wheelwright, brick masonry, and a host of other crafts, to find routes and avenues to freedom. And it really also seeks to unpack and really interrogate this idea of freedom, because it means something, again, different for everybody, and depending also on your landscape. And so that's just a brief whirlwind, because I know my time is brief, on the Fighting for Freedom exhibition, and also really how I identify, not just also as a scholar, but as a person who studies material culture and the production of craft, and it is that most individuals are making for a purpose or a point. And the goal is to find out why those people are making and or creating, as it offers a more prescriptive and perceptive entryway into who they are, and thus furthering the study of life itself. Thank you.
Thank you. Our second scholar is Brooks Lamb. Brooks is the Special Advisor for Strategic Communications at American Farmland Trust, and also an adjunct at Rhodes College in Memphis. And he's going to speak to us about a foundational tension in American agriculture. Please join me in welcoming Brooks.
Thank you, Caroline. Thank you, Tori, for that really excellent presentation. It's a great way to get started. I'm very honored to be with y'all in Knoxville today. I made the long drive over from Memphis yesterday, and it is really nice to be in East Tennessee. It is really difficult to trace the arc of American agricultural history from the founding era to our present moment in 15 minutes. I'm gonna leave some stuff out, okay? It's inevitable. I'm gonna leave some really important things out, but I hope that my remarks today will give us some fertile ground for reflection and perhaps leave us with some questions that we can continue to ponder even after we finish our event today. I want to focus my time on this foundational tension in American agriculture. That tension is between industrialism and agrarianism. And I want to explore this tension by at first starting with two specific characters. Alexander Hamilton, who really represents these more industrial and finance-driven ideals, and Thomas Jefferson, who represents more of an agrarian viewpoint. Both Hamilton and Jefferson, very important to understanding our nation's founding story. Both Hamilton and Jefferson, very important figures in their own right and successful in different ways. They didn't like each other at all. They were really at odds. In fact, if you look at these pictures, they won't even look at each other. It's crazy. I was really proud of that joke, so thank y'all for laughing. I want to take a few minutes and walk through Hamilton and Jefferson's different beliefs and philosophies and understand how they were at tension with each other and how these tensions have continued to manifest. So if we look first at Hamilton. Hamilton was really a proponent of the British approach to leadership and to government. He actually was quoted as saying that he thought that the British Constitution was the most perfect foundation for government if it could be kept free from corruption. He was a big advocate for a powerful central government, and in terms of his economics, finance was a major focus for Hamilton. He believed in banking and credit and stock markets and was a big proponent of industrialization and manufacturing. These were what he thought were the key to a successful American economy. And it's not just that Hamilton believed these things, he also had the power to pursue them, principally in his role as the Secretary of Treasury. I've shared a quote here that I want to read through that I think kind of captures Hamilton's views on agriculture and its economic relevance. I'm going to read it off. It has been maintained, and here he's referencing to Jefferson, who again was his rival, that agriculture is not only the most productive, but the only productive species of industry. The reality of this suggestion has, however, not been verified by any accurate detail of facts and calculations. This is 18th century speak for, hey Jefferson, I think you're a liar and you don't know what you're talking about. And the general arguments which are adduced to prove it are rather subtle and paradoxical, kind of a burn there, than solid or convincing. This comes from Hamilton's 1791 report on the subject of manufactures, which is one of the more important writings and speeches that he gave out. Now, if we contrast that with Jefferson, kind of an entirely different approach and philosophy here. Jefferson really wanted distance from that British model of leadership. He was exceptionally skeptical of a powerful central government, and as opposed to capital and finance and industry, he thought that agriculture was the way our American economy should move forward. He believed that especially smallholder farming was the key to success for our economic and political and personal lives. I want to pause here, because it's as good of a place as any, to recognize that Jefferson is more than a little bit of a hypocrite. He has some incredible writings. He doesn't always put those into action. The clearest example of that is his writing on liberty and freedom and equality and the fact that he owned enslaved people and was a proponent of slavery. Another one that I think is not discussed enough, but is really important, at least to me, Jefferson writes about the importance of smallholder agriculture. Yet he has a plantation, and he does very little of the agricultural work himself, despite talking about how important it is to human character development, right? So kind of a twofold, at least, hypocrite, but does have some really moving writings and does pursue some of these writings in his policy approaches. Jefferson also had power. We all know that, and especially when he and Hamilton were going at it, they were kind of opposing each other, with Hamilton as Secretary of the Treasury and Jefferson as Secretary of State. Again, a couple quotes here that stand out. Jefferson wrote in a letter to John Jay in 1785 that cultivators of the earth are the most valuable citizens. They are the most vigorous, the most independent, the most virtuous, and they are tied to their country and wedded to its liberty and interest by the most lasting bonds. Again, another letter just a couple years later to his fellow Virginian James Madison. I think we shall be virtuous as long as agriculture is our principal subject. When we get piled upon one another in large cities, such as in Europe, we shall become corrupt, as in Europe, and go to eating one another as they do there. So choice words for Europe, some choice words for Hamilton. I don't have the exact quote, but Jefferson wrote at one point that Hamilton will pay off his debt in 15 years, but will never escape the economy that he's established for us here in the US. So very much not fans of each other. And what we see between Jefferson and Hamilton is that they set off this debate and this lasting tension between industrialism and a more agrarian focus to the economy, between finance and credit and distant capital, and even these forces of extraction, and instead the values of subsistence, character, locality, and intimacy. So a strong tension here. But we see that tension kind of manifest all throughout U.S. history up into our current moment. I want to take just a minute to talk about a different example from each century since that founding era when these ideals have been in conflict with one another. The first is from the 19th century, and this is a conflict between what some scholars have called the improvement movement and improvement farmers versus e-migrant farmers, or the e-migrant movement. And I would encourage y'all, if you're interested in what I say here for the next roughly 70 seconds, to check out this book, Larding the Lean Earth, Soil and Society in 19th Century America. It's by a historian named Stephen Stoll, who's a really great writer. His research is really solid, but he also writes in a way that is lively, and so it's a really good read if you get a chance to check this out. But these tensions exist because the improvement movement is focused more on farms and farmers all along the East Coast states, and especially in New England, who planned on being in their specific place in perpetuity. As such, they focused a lot on things like soil health and tending their land very carefully, trying to recognize its limits and not take too much from it than what it could provide. These folks are what Wendell Berry, who's a farmer and writer in Kentucky, might refer to as stickers. They plan to be in their place for as long as they could imagine, and they plan for their children and their children's children and their children's children to take over that same farm and carry it forward. That's in contrast to this e-migrant farmer movement, where instead of focusing on tending a place for a very long time, for generations, this movement was more focused on efficiency at all costs and profit however they could achieve it. They actually started moving west from those East Coast states and weren't wedded to the new places they went. They would plant usually single crops, kind of a monocropping mentality that we still see manifesting today in some agricultural systems, exhaust the soil fertility, and then if they needed to, move on to a different piece of land and start extracting from that soil health too. I'll also note that while the improvement farmers, some of them did own enslaved people, and used that labor, very unjustly of course, this e-migrant movement leaned into that even further. It was kind of this extraction at all costs for the sake of profit mentality that might, when taken to its extremes, align more with industrialism, and that improvement focus might align more with that agrarianism and locality mentality. Moving on into the 20th century, and some personal pictures from my own family's farm. You can actually see Little Brooks here in the Caterpillar hat and the Chapel Hill tractor pull t-shirt, handing some slips of tobacco to my dad, with my grandfather, Papa Horace, in the background. This is me and Papa Horace in our matching Liberty bibs, getting tobacco down to strip. I want to talk a little bit about tobacco, not just because it's part of my own personal history, but because throughout most of the 20th century, it was really important for trying to support this smallholder agrarian vision, at least for this one specific crop. So starting in the New Deal era in the 30s, the federal government instituted production controls on agriculture. They limited how much any one specific farm could grow. What that did was prevent consolidation en masse, at least for tobacco farming. It allowed small farms, especially across the South, but through other states as well, to grow a small amount of tobacco, and because production was limited, be guaranteed a decent return on their labor and their crop, right? So a really important way to try to help smaller scale farmers through controlling that production and allowing good economic vitality as a result. This was an example of the federal government attempting to support this more agrarian approach to farming instead of a more industrial approach. So I want to move on now to the 21st century. And instead of talking about contrasting movements, and instead of talking about policies, I actually want to focus on a statistic. Just a couple weeks ago, the USDA released a survey detailing the number of farms in the United States as of 2025. They show, through their research, that we now have 1.865 million American farms. That is a decline of about 5 million farms since 1935, or a 73% decline. My grandfather, Papa Horace, that I just showed you all the pictures of, was born in 1935 into a sharecropping family. If he were alive today, he would not recognize the agriculture that we have in our country. That is because that despite some attempts, like the tobacco program that I mentioned in the previous slide, our national policy and our economy have tended to favor industrialism over agrarianism to some pretty substantial extents. And you may be familiar with this phrase. It was coined by a former Secretary of Agriculture named Earl Butz in the 1970s. It persists today. Get big or get out. It's essentially this charge to farmers that unless you're going to industrialize and get bigger and bigger, we don't want you. You're not efficient enough. Your style of farming is not what we need here. If we think back to Jefferson and Hamilton, I think one of the important facts is that neither of them won in pursuing their philosophy. Jefferson had this more agrarian vision. It's really what he pushed and his allies pushed. Hamilton had this more industrial, financial vision. It's what he and his allies pushed. They stayed in tension and they fought back and forth a little bit, but they actually both stayed relevant. I'm concerned that we are moving away from actually having any tension at all. I'm really concerned that we've shifted too far toward industrialism and too far from agrarianism. And I think that that imbalance has really severe consequences for our environment, for rural communities, for our economy, for everyone in our country who eats, who drinks water, and who breathes, which I believe is all of us. That sounds and is dark, but there is hope, I believe, if we nurture it. We have examples of farmers and communities who tend to the land and tend to each other with love, while also striving for economic security and efficiency. We are lucky to be joined by one such farmer, and Allie, who's going to be with us on the panel today. I also had a chance in my book, Love for the Land, Lessons from Farmers Who Persist in Place, to interview dozens of such farmers, most of them in Tennessee, and talk with them about what motivates their persistence and their resilience in the face of this ever more industrialized agricultural system. And they shared that it really is their love for place, not a sentimental or nostalgic or sappy love, but a virtuous one that is enduring and active and forceful, that motivates their stewardship and their perseverance. And I think that their example, if we are courageous enough to look to it and to follow it, can help us forge a path forward. Thank you all so much for your time today. I'm very excited for the panel discussion. Thank you.
Will the panelists please join us up here? Thank you, Brooks. All right, we're moving into the panel portion of our discussion. You're great. So to get us started, I would like to ask, Wookie, to please introduce yourself and your work and tell us just a little bit about your vision, your ideal future for crafters.
Okay. I'm new to this, but I'll start off by saying my name is Wookie Massaquoi-Wicks. I was born and raised in Liberia, West Africa. My family's from Liberia and Sierra Leone. I came to this country in the early 1980s to go to school, and my voice is kind of low. Let me turn this way. And I was fortunate enough to have some of my immediate family migrate, come over here and join me in Knoxville, Tennessee. My mother, my uncle, my sisters, and a brother who's gone back. But yeah, that's where I come from. And in terms of the future of crafting, I'm not really sure. I stepped on this stage last year with a bang, it seemed like. But I'm hoping that, there's more opportunities for young people. One of my first jobs was at Highlander Research and Education Center. I was there for a few years. And we had the Children's Justice Program. We hit those kids when they were young. They wanted to soak things up. And that's how they tend to carry it on. And I'm hoping that for crafters, they'll have that opportunity, especially the young people, to move that way. It's so hard now, we're kind of, one of the challenges that maybe you'll ask us this question again, but is trying to the technology and social media, it distracts them, and trying to bring them in, it's kind of hard. I start with my son and my nieces and nephews, and I try to figure out a way to bring them to the table, food, like good food, so they come to eat. We talk about stories from the past, from our ancestors. We speak the Kumukwa. So, and I'm hoping that, they'll carry that on, and they can tell a friend, and a friend, and a friend, and it catches on. But I'm hoping not just my son and my nieces and nephews, but young people as a whole. That's my target, is to get young people interested in what we do, and hopefully there are more young people involved in the future, expressing themselves and giving the platform to do that.
Thank you. Allie, would you mind sharing a little bit about yourself and your hope for the future of agriculture?
Oh yeah, definitely. My name's Allie Simpson. I have a small farm of about 60 acres in 10 Mile, Tennessee. I operate that with my husband Tim and his brother Russ. It's mostly organic vegetables, not USDA certified. We can talk about that later. It's hard to get. And as well as some beef cattle and some chickens, things like that. That's our farm, and we sell a bit at the Knoxville Farmers Market, the main part of the season, the Market Square one, as well as some local restaurants. And every year I try to do a little bit more, but it's pretty small scale overall. But I love it. It's great. And so that's our farm, and I got a lot of requests for the future, my ideal future. So buckle up. We got a lot. And I think like what I would like to see as the future of agriculture is a kind of agriculture that treats labor well, whether undocumented or not. Agriculture that is part of the solution to climate change, and agriculture that also is part of what all of you do every day. Everybody has to eat, and as someone who grows local, seasonal, organic, healthy food, it's for all of you who are also stuck in the grind. It's hard to go find that, afford it, go make dinner every night when we're all in this kind of system that is a little alienating, a little tough. So I'd like all of society to change as well. And I guess lastly, just having a culture that prioritizes like the education of younger folks and enables them to become growers on whatever scale, whether it's a small garden or all the way up to commodity farming.
What beautiful and hopeful visions for the future. These are great. So I'd like to ask each of you two a question, and then Torin and Brooks, if you could respond. So, Wookie, what makes your field, what makes crafting special?
For me personally, it allows me to explore my heritage, traditions, culture, and also have some admiration and respect for those who came before. And that's my main thing. It's important, some people don't want to look back. They want to just focus on, what's ahead, the advanced technology, how to do things faster. But it's always good to go back and see how things have been done and change it, adjust it, do whatever. But I think the special thing that I do is that I keep that connection with my ancestors. It's important to me as an African to do so. So, like for instance, the piece I have, the head, which is one of the pieces I started doing this last year. It was in a few exhibits. I try not to focus too much on the face. I try to focus on those bright colors, African fabric colors. And of course, I have the hairstyles and the braiding and threading and whatever, because those hairstyles are like communication. They tell you who you are. You walk in there, they know, oh, she's married, or she's from a kingdom, or she's just lost her grandmother, or whatever. It speaks a lot, and I thought that was something, and I'm still kind of trying to use fabric, because I do tie-dye and batiking, so I'm using the fabric. Even the head, I'm using gauze with some plaster, just to keep it together. I don't know if I answered the question.
You absolutely answered the question. And so, Torin, I'm curious, how does that, as a scholar who studied, as you were sharing in your presentation, how does that description, how is it the same or different from these makers from the Revolutionary era?
Well, the reality is, I think it's spot on in the sense that was a lot of different things to say about it, but in direct support of the comments, these individuals are coming, first, some of them are already pre-trained. And this idea of cultural retention, right, which is a term that's ascribed to many peoples of what we might consider first generation African descent who were brought over through the transatlantic slave trade, and the different skills and ideas that they already possessed and how they use that to transition here. And so we know for a fact that under the institution of enslavement, enslavers knew of these cultural retentions too. They would seek certain people who come from countries who would grow rice or okra. They would particularly look for certain people who could do certain things. But within the Black crafting community during that time, and even after enslavement during Reconstruction, it was a familial process. When you look through the records, and even in our exhibition, you have people like, as I mentioned, John Hemmings, who everybody knows, or most people know John's sister, Sally. And, but many people don't know that family had a number of individuals. And in fact, John apprentices two of his nephews and also teaches them the trade of making and crafting. And so we see from the records many times, and so accurately so, without interference and social media and things like that, times were different, but that notwithstanding, this idea of training and passing down tradition, learning how to make. I'm always thinking about one example. I was looking through records in the plantation, and you saw an individual named Big Galva, and he was a house carpenter. And then right after him, you see Baby Galva, and he's a apprenticing house carpenter. And so this idea that trades were passed down, skills were learned. I think what's also important to that, though, is just this idea that as you move forward, you have to think about, and this is what I was trying to get to in my presentation, the reasons why people are created. But beyond that, the pride in which people have, and particularly the pride that enslaved people had in the products that they made. When we think about production, period, now, whether it's growing crop, or whether it's producing craft, or whether it's producing utilitarian objects, a lot of people run to ascribe monetary value to quality, and that's just a complete wrong assumption, because you want something that is made from a knowledgeable person, you want something that's made from the proper materials, and you wanted something that was made with pride. And if you can find it with love and pride are hard sometimes to find within an object. But Dick Pointer, who I referenced earlier, one of the reasons why he's famed is that his chairs, I haven't tried, but they say it's unbreakable. You can throw them, step on them, shatter them, and he became legendary because of the process of making. And so I think all of that speaks to it, and I guess I'll just end with there's an historic home where in the South, in South Carolina, where they were trying to recreate the actual chemistry of the brick composite that the enslaved had made at the plantation. And long story short, they were unable to remake that brick composite. And those bricks were stronger. They have lasted over 250 years. And, folks today were saying, we don't know what the true nature of this composition is, but whatever it is, it's nearly unbreakable. And so, I think all of those kind of bounce back to this idea that, when you're putting pride in, and whenever it's a familial trait and it's passed down and it's within a family, it means more. And when people take pride in their work, these things last on. And I think a lot of times we don't give enough credit when we talk about the enslaved experience, because we like to think that everything was a forceful act. A lot of these acts were done under the tyranny and oppression, but that doesn't mean that pride or artistic prowess weren't there.
Thank you.
I just wanted to mention too, I started this journey, I guess, with the help of the Tennessee Folklife Traditional Arts Apprenticeship Program. So that was nice to kind of get me and my son, who we went through the whole year of creating and talking about history and why things were done a certain way. We tried some things that we tried to do it the traditional way. It didn't work here in America. So we realized, like, we tried to do the mud clothing. We didn't get the right mud because it's usually in the water basin at home. And it didn't stick as well. We tried, cola nuts, which are really vibrant, but I mean, we got some stuff from it. The tie-dye, the bright one, that's part of it was cola nut dyeing. But just getting these opportunities, so like what I'm trying to say is that the Tennessee Folklife program is one great way. I wish it would expand to different states and different, to allow people to be able to do this stuff. It's important, I think. So I just want to say kudos to, Tennessee Folklife program.
So Allie, I forgot to switch over to the pictures of your farm when you were introducing yourself. But I have the same question for you. What makes growing special?
Well, when I was first looking at that question, I was like, oh, it's kind of special, sort of like a panda is special. People kind of look at small and medium-sized family farms like, oh, that's probably the last of its kind. The book that Brooks was mentioning, Guarding the Lean Earth, was talking about. It was part of a reading group that my partner was in, and people were really pro staying in place. Yeah, that's how our farm is. And he was like, you don't have any kids. You don't have any, and and then there were no kids that want to take on the farm. So it's, again, kind of like a panda, like that, not as many little ones that are either able to go into it. It's very different now. There's not as much stuff being passed down. It's hard to do. And I guess on a more, on a less note about extinction, not dwelling on that too long. I really think the true reason why it's special is that regardless of the size of the grower or the farm, is that everybody has to eat, and it takes a lot to make that happen. And when you are doing that every day, you cannot help but constantly see how everything is interconnected. It's often said as a platitude, oh, we're all part of the same planet Earth. But when everything you do affects, say, the water quality on your farm, the soil, the health of your animals, the success of your plants, are you growing flowers for pollinators on the side over there? Did you cut your hay in time? Can you get 2 cuttings? There are so many things in this web, and you are part of shaping the world, however, at whatever scale you are, and it's essential. And so it's cool to be part of that.
So Brooks, how does that compare to the Revolutionary era?
Oh, compared to the Revolutionary, it's a good question. I do want to just reflect for a second on Allie's comments, because I think they're spot on. One of the reasons that I think agriculture is special is because it can be one of our most intimate societal relationships with the earth, right? Because when you're farming, you are taking from the land, you are using it, and that's okay as long as we're using it with respect, and we're not exclusively using it. We're trying to give back to it as well, right? So I think it's really important because it shows this give and take between humans and the earth itself that is necessary for our own survival, right? As Allie mentioned, everyone has to eat, and so making sure that we're doing that with care is really important. In terms of how it stretches back to the founding era, one thing that jumps out to me is just that proportionally, we have far fewer farmers as part of our society now than we did then. I mean, if you look at the statistics, I think it's like 1% of the American population is classified as a producer, as an agricultural producer. So that means 1% of our population is producing the food that supports the other 99%, right? I don't know the statistic or the percentage from the founding era, but something tells me that there were probably more people engaged with agriculture then, and that we were a much more rural country than we are now. That's not to say that the last 250 years have been an entirely declensionist narrative where we've seen nothing but decline. We've seen some great advances too, and some could argue that it's actually really beneficial that we don't have to have as many people producing food and fiber for us now. I would personally love to see a repopulation of the countryside and a smaller scale farming that is more attentive to the land. There's a quote from a conservationist out in Kansas named Wes Jackson. There's this really powerful visual quote that he calls the eyes to acres ratio. I think we need enough eyes on the land who can actually see what it needs and go tend to it and care for it, instead of having so few people that we can't actually see what all our farms and our land need. So I'd love to see more of that. But I think one thing that is different is that agriculture might be less a part of our lives now than it was then. And I think we could arguably say that societally we are further from the production of our food as a culture than we ever have been before. And I think that has some major risks to it.
So Brooks, in Brooks's book that he mentioned up there, Love for the Land, you ended with this call to cultivate a culture of care. Could you explain a bit what you meant by that?
Yeah, happy to. We care for what we love, and we tend to love what we intimately know, right? So before applying that to an agricultural or environmental context, let's think about that series I just mentioned in terms of people-to-people relationships. So let's think about friendship, right? Friends are people who we have spent a lot of time with. They are people who we've gotten to know, and people who we understand. We can walk up to a friend in a crowded room full of strangers and immediately look at them and probably know what they're feeling or thinking without them having to say a word, right? Because we have that level of intimacy with them. Having that level of intimacy, I think, leads to love. And not like a nostalgic, sappy, wistful, sentimental, emotional love, but a virtuous love, one that is enduring and is active and that shapes our very characters. Having a love like that for a person leads us to want to care for that person, right? I think a lot of us would do just about anything within reason for some of our closest friends, right? We want to work for their well-being. Really go to work for their well-being. I would love to see an agriculture that approaches care in that same way, and that gives farmers the chance to actually not feel so under the gun all the time and so spurred by policy and the economy to not be able to practice that love, because right now our economy and national agricultural policy tend to treat love and fidelity to place as liabilities rather than assets. And so I would love to see a culture that actually encourages those intimate connections, not only with the land and what we're growing, but with each other, because I think it is those intimate connections that can lead to love and ultimately lead to longer term, better, more respectful, and more equitable stewardship for the planet and also places and the people who call them home. So if I could push for a culture of care, I think that love would be at the center.
And so how does that resonate with the rest of the panelists? Like what would a culture of care based on growing and crafting look like? Or what does it look like? Can we take yours?
Well, I think that So the question is, what does growing with a culture of care in mind look
Yeah,
like?
what does it look like today?
I guess I can't speak for everywhere, but on our farm, the culture of care to me is partially, you don't think about like, it's like to paraphrase JFK, you don't think about what the farm can like do for you necessarily, it's about what you can do for the place that you're in, is how you improve it all the time, how you make it better. Kind of like going back to the whole extraction versus improvement idea, and you feel like you are in service to the land, and not just out of some kind of romanticized notion, but because of care, because care is not always pretty, and having that connection is really important, and I think important for the future if we're gonna shift our way of thinking about how we grow food, and also to connect it to like a community kind of thing, is that a lot of times we have an idea of this farm as this sort of little bubble, like it's the family, we're all working on it, that kind of thing. But in my experience, it's also a community effort. The amount of times that my partner and I will go help the old timer farmers down the road, and then they'll let us borrow their fancy equipment because they have more money than us or whatever. They're older and have collected more things, and so there's kind of like a give and take, and folks always willing to help each other out because we know what we're going through, and so that's what I think about.
It's beautiful. What about a crafting-based culture of care? Any ideas of what that looks like?
Like I said, I started late, but it seems polarized from my perspective because I'm in my house. We just finished COVID, just got over that. It just seemed like it's so far out, and I don't know as many crafters, and I'm sure I'll get to that point as I keep going on my journey. But I think it's just, hopefully having that community, having young people as part of that community so they can be able to express themselves and be part of the decision-making process. It's important during the future, I think, to have community leaders and politicians to at least be able to give some support, whether it's monetary or space or supplies or whatever, and keep it going. Don't do a one-time thing and then go sit down behind your desk. You gotta keep it going to keep the movement going. The crafters movement, that sounds good.
I like that.
So but that's what I'm hoping the future, will be, what I see it as now. But I'm hoping that, it tends to get more unified and information is passed easily to the different parts about where you can get supplies. It's hard to get traditional supplies in America. So you use synthetic dyes, or things like that. Yeah, so things like that would be easier.
I think I, unfortunately, only have time for one more question. So I want us to think about the future. So when we imagine in 50 years, the future growers and the future makers, what do y'all imagine they're doing different? And what do you think is going to be the same?
I'll be dead in 50 years.
That will be different.
Okay. Now that I've said that.
I mean, I think, as was just mentioned, for your earlier question, the youth, we like to say the youth of the future, the youth of the key. This is true. But we have to truly instill them with the right energy, the right tools, the right platform, the right access to make a lot of our hopeful ambitions reality. So one of the things I like to see is just an expansion of appreciation and incorporation of crafting, right? So, and it comes in a lot of different ways. From the context we were talking before this about just this, everything that is History Day, and I was just a participant in the Middle Tennessee region, and the students creating these posters were phenomenal. I mean, people were building spaceships, and we were underwater, and we were, somebody built a farm, literally somebody built a farm, but they have to be instilled with the mindset and encouraged to say, hey, you can actually create a farm if you want. That there's a process, there's a business side to it. There is, this is a way that you can help the community. I think in certain cases, we've industrialized, society too far in the sense that we're thinking about profit, as in your presentation, and not enough about how our actions overall help the community, by which and through we get to profit, or at least a level of subsistence. So I think it's really just kind of expanding this idea, and then also just immersing the future in it. So again, how are we bringing, children, youth, professionals, new professionals, right? I think that was my point too. I lost it for a second. Sometimes we get so focused on the youth, we forget about everyone else who's making a life transition. There are a lot of people who say, well, I'm done with this career. I was a lawyer, I'm no longer a lawyer, maybe I'm going to be a farmer. It's just as important in certain aspects. And so I think catching anybody where they are and helping them kind of move forward by granting those ways of access. So I think access is a key component to your question for me.
I guess to add to that in terms of, in the next 50 years, the education aspect is going to be so important because, kind of like I was talking about earlier, there's not as many people just inheriting the family business anymore. There has to be ways, whether you're in the middle of your life or when you're a kid, to get into these things. And the way we have, say, our schools set up now, they don't prioritize the arts, even though art is one of the most valuable. I can't draw for anything, but I learned so much about how to be a person in my art classes, and that's underfunded. And while there are some like ag classes in some schools, it's not really a priority. It's a side note because we gotta train everybody to code now, I guess, or whatever. The education aspect in the next decades is going to be crucial, as well as how we shape our policies because these issues are so big that it is going to take like a government level intervention to change things. Like when Brooks was kind of talking about how at one point smallholders of tobacco farms were incentivized. That's no longer the case. What's incentivized, they have their hand on the scale to incentivize row cropping and factory farms, and corporations like Tyson are just allowed to consolidate, and the FTC is like, I guess we'll go after you for your price fixing that you've been doing, which all impacts the ability for smaller holdings to compete in any kind of way. And I guess to go on, the other thing is sort of, I think a lot of people look for these new innovative answers to what the future is going to look like. And I think with the future of agriculture, it's kind of the same as what people have been talking about for a long time. Like when you think about kind of pioneers in organic agriculture, like Booker T. Washington or Douglas Carver, Booker T. Watley, they all focused on, we can't afford to go into debt to these big chemical companies or to farm this particular way. Let's compost. Let's compost. Composting is still going to be, that's the answer in 50 years. We still got to compost, you guys. So it's a lot of just taking all those lessons. We've already kind of know how to farm pretty well and sustainably. A lot of people have figured it out. And it's how we choose that as a society for all of us. That's what I hope, if I live to see it.
Yeah, and I will start off by just saying I really appreciate Torian and Allie's reflections. I think they're beautiful and really important. For me, when I think about 50 years from now in farming and agriculture, I really would love to see a reversal of this continued decline in the number of farms, and would love to see young people, even like myself, if I think personally for a second, have a chance, like an authentic chance to get into agriculture and maybe succeed. I'm actually I've been writing an op-ed recently that I'm trying to get published at soon, and I kept hearing over the last year all these people who told me young people don't want to farm. They don't want to work that hard. It's too dirty for millennials and Gen Z. Like, they don't want to live in rural communities. And maybe there are some people who feel that way, but I've met so many other people, and think again of myself, who do want to farm, but cannot afford it. I grew up on a 75-acre farm. We raised cattle and vegetables and tobacco, and I will actually briefly say, I have no love for tobacco products. They killed 3 out of my 4 grandparents, including Papa Horace, who I showed the picture of earlier, but the way it was grown was really important for the economic viability of our farm, so I want to make sure to make that clear. But I grew up on that farm. Last fall, 32 acres came up for sale less than a mile from my family's land. No house, no barn. If you got close enough to that perimeter fencing and sneezed, it would all probably fall over, right? So not like the fanciest place by any means. They're asking $34,000 an acre for that land. It's because our community is within an hour drive of Nashville, and we're actually seeing what could be called a lot of rural gentrification in our area, where people who would like to farm can't afford it because land is so expensive. I imagine that's true around some parts of Knoxville as well. So I would love to see a chance for people to actually get into agriculture, and I'll try not to drone on too long. One other quick statistic I want to share is very Tennessee specific. If we look at the last 2 censuses, I don't know what the plural is of census, census of agriculture, 2017 to 2022, we see that in that period, Tennessee, our home state, lost 6,800 farms in just 5 years. That's about a 10% decline. That number should be alarming. What's more alarming is that about 98% of that decline came on farms that are 500 acres or smaller. And the largest farms in Tennessee actually covered 630,000 more acres, according to the 2022 census, than they did in 2017. That's really alarming, right? And I think we've got to find a way to reverse that and give people, whether they are pursuing a second career, as Tori mentioned, or whether they are young people who want to farm, the belief that they can try to do it and not be guaranteed either failure or extreme difficulty, right? We need to make farming easier for the next generation. Not to make it easy, it's gonna be hard, but we need to make it, to again kind of reference back to something Torrin said, more accessible for people. So that's what I hope to see in 50 years, is a more accessible agriculture.
Really quick, I think because this is important, I think two other things I think are critical for the future is we have to return to basics and just self-sufficiency. I think maybe even 20 years ago, it might have been a joke amongst, younger individuals about the abilities to cook or not cook. And, I myself straddle the fence, whether some days I can cook, some days I can't. But that is completely different from my complete dependence on producing food, growing food. And I think now we're at a point where in certain communities, and which is growing, the ability to be able to purchase food is becoming a real issue, where it is not as much an issue for that individual to necessarily learn how to grow, but it's not being put into, they're trying to find access again, so that, harkens back to access, but individuals need to know how to grow food, cooking is great, but can you produce that as a means for survival? And so I think that's an important piece. The only other thing I was just going to mention, because you were saying it, and I agree, like, I think history plays a large role here. Of course, I'm an historian, but that aside, like, knowing also just the roots, right? Like, Tennessee and tobacco, go hand in hand in a lot of ways. And while you mentioned, the negative impacts, and they're obvious, this idea of what tobacco as an agricultural staple did for the development of Tennessee is not remiss at all. And so as we see all of this leaving, we need to find a way to remember and to, not just that, but agriculture period, but specifically we're talking about tobacco, and it's like, yes, that's a major core in how many forms developed and changed. So I think also being able to fundamentally remember and to learn is going to be critical in the next 50 years.
Yeah, well, I'm just thinking, when I came to this country, just thinking about individualism, you're individually, and that's pretty good. It's got its good place, but I think hopefully that in 50 years or so, people working more together. One crafter's problem is my problem too. You have to care for each other. You have to care for what you'll do. And it seems like we're just kind of going in our own little corners, and it becomes difficult. If we can all just come together and be unified in some ways, I'm not, you see somebody having a problem, or you have something that I have too much of my supplies, maybe I can ask somebody if they would use it, then maybe throwing it out or whatever. I think just the idea of just taking responsibility of your neighbor in everything we do, just helping out. So I'm hoping we will become more and more that way than being such individuals, like, oh, that's her problem, I'm not gonna worry about it. I think it would help crafters and those who are in agriculture.
It could help everyone.
If everybody would just, we're all here together, we're nowhere. We might as well help each other. What else can we do?
What a hopeful note for the future.
Yeah, it would be a wonderful future if we did that.
Okay, so I know that there are some questions, so yes.
I've been chomping at the bit here for the past hour and a half, because everything everyone has said today reminds me of an essay that Alice Walker, the writer of The Color Purple, wrote in the late 1960s, called In Search of Our Mother's Garden. And it's all about creative self-expression through creating her mother created a small little garden, cared for it, tended to it. Neighbors would come by and compliment her on it. They would start their own garden because of hers. Together they would get together and discuss, their gardens and build a community. Everything sprang from her mother's self-expression of creating and designing a little garden. And you all said that in so many different ways. And I just, that's amazing.
Thank you for the literature connection.
Yes.
Wonderful, yes.
I just think that a sign of disrespect to all of you is mass production. Whether they're producing furniture that breaks in 3 years, or food that's overproduced and goes to waste,
Fabric,
fabric
they do.
that people is so poorly made you can't use it for a rag rug. Is there any way we can flip that switch? That durability, because I mean, I remember my grandmother came and made the rag rugs, and I still have my grandparents' furniture was better made, better produced, food tasted better when the cream came to the top of the milk jar. I mean, everything became so. Yeah, I go to the grocery store, buy oatmeal, and there are 16 different kinds. But is there any way culturally we can switch that with younger people to buy quality versus quantity? Because having that idea of waste, it's wasteful and
Like
landfills and all that kind of stuff.
fast fashion, all that. I personally, I want to plug the degrowth movement, which I feel like Thomas Jefferson would be like super down with if he were around. It's on the further reading list if you guys got the little agenda, but degrowth is kind of a cultural and economic philosophy that kind of speaks to what you're talking about. It sounds kind of scary because everyone's like, no, GDP go higher, growth, more growth, we need to keep growing and growing until we go to outer space and grow more and colonize Mars. And what degrowth speaks to is how we try to basically stop incentivizing industries that are extremely wasteful and sort of penalize that kind of waste. If you think about something like fast fashion, which is very much destroying the planet and is terrible for labor, it's terrible for water, it's terrible for basically everything. And it's like, well, how using things like policies, the kind of incentives we offer in terms of government and things like that, and then talking about cultural shifts, it doesn't seem like it, but I think some of those pressures will trend over time. Like, Americans today eat way less beef than we used to, by orders of magnitude. We're still eating more beef overall because there's more of us, but compared to the 70s, people were just like a burger a day, maybe, and not anymore, just to the economic impact due to people feeling like, oh, this isn't as good for me. They don't feel like it's healthy. It's more expensive now, honestly. Like, there's a lot of negative pressure on it. And of course, they're still trying to grow and ship it abroad and stuff like that. But if we kind of work on those two things, both culturally and changing how we do economics, I don't know, that's funny. I hope.
I have just a one
Yes.
statement, and it goes towards, I forgot your name here, the gentleman on the end, but you brought up something about like youths and not only them learning about, I guess maybe crafting or even growing, but also how those intersections of learning how to learn the business and how to also support community. And that brought to mind, if you ever have a chance to go by or support the Bottom Knocks, if you've not heard of it. That community center is a Black-owned business, ran by women mostly. But there is a community center that also focuses on cultural arts. There's a kiln there so that people learn how to craft their own, whatever it is, pots or to use for utility or just for art. Also, local artists are featured there. Is a bookstore. And the sewing program is what made me think about it. During the summers, there's a Sew It, Sell It program that young people can come to, and they learn how to sew. They can sew whatever it is that they decide that they want to craft, but they also learn about entrepreneurship. They go to the University of Tennessee, and they learn about how to grow their own business so that it's sustainable. And through that, they have a market day, and they sell their products. And so if you're ever able to support that type of program, this is a program what he's talking about is functionally and practically being utilized in our community. But it also takes those fundraiser dollars for that to continue on. But it's been going on for years. And so if you ever have an opportunity to go by there, they're on Magnolia, stop by and support them, because they're actually putting into practice what we're discussing today. Also, they also do give away seeds, and they work with Beardsley Farms and different farms to teach people how to grow. So everything that we're discussing today is you can find at the bottom.
Thank you for sharing that resource. And just to piggyback off of what Allie was saying, on the back of the agenda sheet for today, which is in the back, there's a further resources page. And if you scan the QR code on it, it'll take you to a digital version of the same thing with links. So you can just find them right there. And that is all of our time for today. So please join me in thanking our panelists for sharing their expertise with us.